platform, and folks can go view after. As we watch the numbers creep up here. Got folks giving shouts out in the chat there. Hey, Jeff Klein, John Blaney, a couple of good friends of mine, Brent George. Welcome, everybody. Those of you coming in, we're just waiting on a few more to gather. We had a good number of folks registered. I know we've had some folks jumping from one meeting to the other, so we'll give it just a minute. I think we've built in enough time today. We'll see how things go. Okay, a little inter-service rivalry there from Captain Young, no surprise. Always looking out for his soldier comrades. Oh, we got a Coastie in there commenting, look out, they're always outnumbered. All right, Allie, we're up to about 40. What do you think? All right, Todd's in there. Simplify.
I think let's give it about 30 more seconds, Guy, and we should be good to kick it off.
Okay, awesome. All right. The banter begins in the chat. If there's anything you civilians see in the chat that you don't understand, we either can't tell you or you'll have to tell us, you'll have to ask us later. But I think for the most part, it should be cleaner than we remember from our past. Okay, we're going to get started, Allie. And there you go. And she's going to do her best to keep up with me on these slides, and we'll see how well she does, because I'm going to speed through some of these. But good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be across the country. WWT is a global entity, and we have people attending these webinars and sessions all across the globe. And welcome to our Memorial Day Roundtable discussion. My name is Guy McDonald. I lead our Veterans Employee Resource Group here at WWT, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. Man, we're so glad you were able to join us today for a very important and hopefully meaningful discussion really around the meaning of Memorial Day and why do we observe it here in the U.S. We've got some very special guests to introduce to you today who will be sharing some very personal stories of service and sacrifice, which is really what Memorial Day is all about. I'm very honored to be able to moderate the discussion. But before I introduce those guests, let me tell you a little bit about the Veterans ERG here at WWT. As I mentioned, I'm currently the lead on our ERG, and our executive sponsor this year is my friend Mike Taylor. I don't think Mike could be with us today. He had a previous commitment, but he asked me to pass on his regards to you. He and I will be teammates in this endeavor this year with our Veterans ERG. We've also got a very capable and dedicated steering committee that keeps us headed in the right direction as we seek to sort of advance our vision, our mission, our goals that we have as an ERG. And you can see very wide representation of all of the branches there from very many eras, and just a great group of folks to work with. Speaking of vision, mission, and goals, as with all of the ERGs that we have here at WWT, we have vision, mission, and goals. And everything that we do as an ERG is really, we try to make sure is supported by one of our three pillars of workforce, business impact, and community outreach. Okay, so that's it about the ERG, what we're all about, and what we the goals that we have. You can see some of the goals there that Allie has on the screen. you can go and look at these goals in a couple of different places, and we'll tell you about that a little bit later. Now, as we get closer to hearing from our guests, we thought it would be a good idea to share a little bit about the history, the origins, and the meaning of Memorial Day. And I'm going to read an account, and this is from the Department of Veteran Affairs, about the origin of Veterans Day. So, and some of you know this story, many of you may not. But 3 years after the Civil War ended, on May the 5th of 1868, the head of an organization of Union veterans called the Grand Army of the Republic established what was known as Decoration Day. It was a time for the nation to decorate the graves of the war dead with flowers. So Major General John A. Logan declared that that should be on May the 30th. And it's believed that he chose that date because flowers would generally be in bloom all across the country. Now, the first large observance of Decoration Day was held that year at Arlington National Cemetery. Many of you have probably visited, right across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. The ceremony centered around the mourning draped veranda at the Arlington Mansion, once the home of General Robert E. Lee. Various Washington officials, including General and Mrs. Ulysses S. Grant, presided over the ceremonies. Then after all the speeches, the children from the Soldiers and Sailors Orphan Home and members of the GAR made their way through the cemetery, strewing flowers on both Union and Confederate graves, reciting prayers and singing hymns. Now, there are a lot of local observances that claim to be the first observance of Memorial Day or Decoration Day all across the country. But in 1966, Congress and then President Lyndon Johnson declared that Waterloo, New York was actually the birthplace of Memorial Day. Now, there had been a ceremony there on May the 5th of 1866 that honored local veterans who had fought in the Civil War. Businesses closed, residents flew flags at half-staff, much like we do today. Supporters of Waterloo's claim to be the first say that earlier observances in those other places were either informal, they weren't community-wide, or they were like one-time events. So by the end of the 19th century, Memorial Day ceremonies were being held on May the 30th all throughout the nation. State legislatures passed proclamations designating the day. The Army and the Navy adopted regulations for the proper observance at their facilities. It wasn't until after World War I, however, that the day was expanded to honor those who had died in all American wars, not just the Civil War. And then in 1971, Memorial Day was actually declared a national holiday by act of Congress, and is sometimes still referred to as Decoration Day. Then it was also placed as part of that act on the last Monday in May. On that Monday, like a lot of federal holidays, to extend the weekend. Now, fast forward to the year 2000, to ensure the sacrifices of America's fallen heroes are not forgotten, the U.S. Congress passed and the president signed into law the National Moment of Remembrance Act, and that created a White House Commission on the National Moment of Remembrance. Now, the commission's charter is to encourage the people of the United States to give something back to their country, which provides them so much freedom and opportunity, by encouraging and coordinating these commemorations of Memorial Day and the National Moment of Remembrance. The National Moment of Remembrance encourages all Americans to pause wherever they are at 3 p.m. local on Memorial Day for a moment of silence to remember and honor those who died in service to the country. Okay. Well, now that we know a little about the origins of Memorial Day and why we observe it here in the U.S., it's time to move on and introduce our guests to you. So, in fact, I'm going to have them introduce themselves to you. And what they're going to do is tell you who they are, where they live, or where they might be in the moment, and then whose story they're going to tell today. And once we've done that with all four of our guests, we'll come back around to the beginning, and then I'm going to have each of them tell the story. So, Dennis, let's start with you. Tell us who you are, where you're at.
Thank you, Guy. Hi, hello, everybody. I'm Dennis Yeager. I'm a senior CSC. I'm located here in Omaha, Nebraska. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about my Uncle John, who was a paratrooper in the 101st Airborne and lost his life during the Normandy invasion, World War II.
All right. Welcome, Dennis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Ben.
Yep. Hi, my name is Ben Dalton. I'm an engagement manager with Management Consulting and SE&E. Today, I'm located in St. Louis. I'm at GHQ today. And today I'm going to talk to you about Command Sergeant Major Timothy Boyard, who was my first sergeant during my first and second deployments to Iraq.
Okay. And Kelly.
Hi, my name is Kelly Kowa, and I am the Gold Star mother of Specialist Corey Kowa, who was killed in Afghanistan in September 2009. And I'm also from Florida, but currently I'm at Fort Bragg, North Carolina for All-American Week.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Kelly. Greg.
Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Page. Thank you for having me today. I live just south of Omaha, Nebraska at Beaver Lake with my wife, Jenny, and my kids, Mason and Emmy. Our son, their older brother, Dagan, was killed in Afghanistan during the withdrawal in August of 2021. And I'm looking forward to sharing his story and how we're continuing to keep his legacy alive and doing good in his name.
Awesome. Well, team, if that doesn't get you excited to hear these stories, I don't know what will. And I'm excited to hear that. I know a couple of the stories a little better than others, but I'm just as excited to hear. And I'm going to have some tissues nearby because I'm a crier. So anyway, Dennis, tell us about your uncle.
Certainly. Thanks again, Guy. And thanks, everybody, for giving me the opportunity here today to chat about him. So my uncle was born John James Penta on the 4th of July, 1924 in central New York. He was born to my grandma and grandpa, who were dairy farmers in central New York at that time. So the bulk of his formative years were spent in high school, working on the farm. And then when he became a teenager, according to my grandmother, he did a lot of girl chasing. Like a lot of young men during that time, he wasn't really too military minded until Pearl Harbor happened. And then that end of 1941, he was only 17, but he approached his dad about joining the service. He felt compelled, like a lot of young people did, to join and serve the country and protect it. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to him, my granddad had put him on a farm waiver, because back in those days, during the Second World War, the U.S. government had deemed several industries as critical to the war effort. So farming, believe it or not, was one of those. So Johnny was the only sibling old enough to help his dad work the farm, so he had a military exemption. It was all filled out and filed with the government. Well, Johnny didn't like that, right? He had a series of discussions, shall we say, with his dad, wanting to really go and serve. And in about 6 months, in the beginning of 1943, he was old enough, and his dad finally relented and let him sign up. So he enlisted in the Army and started basic training at Camp Joseph Robinson in Arkansas on May 1st, 1943. And about midway through basic training, he volunteered for the paratroopers. I don't know, many of you are familiar, but back then the paratroopers were, in its infancy, right? There were only a handful of people accepted. It was very grueling training, but he was attracted by the fact that he could double his pay and be part of an elite unit, right? So he joined, and he started at Fort Benning, Georgia, his jump training. And from first week of September through the first week of October, he actually made it. He qualified. He did his 5th jump on the 1st of October, 1943, and was assigned to the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, F Company, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Platoon, and shipped out to Camp McCall, North Carolina, to join that unit and begin training with them. Shortly after that, he was sent home on a 10-day furlough to Palmyra, New York, where the farm was. And that picture you see on the screen was the last photo that was taken of him with his family at that time, right before he shipped out to go back to Camp McCall for Christmas. right around the beginning of January 1944, he shipped out with the 501st to England. And I have all the letters he wrote to his mother, and I saw he had set up a coded message for his parents to kind of tell them where he was going, because it was unclear whether he was going to be sent to the Pacific Theater of Operations or the ETO in Europe. And he put a little code in there. I think it was for Reverend Higgins. If he asked a question about Reverend Higgins, then his mother knew he was going to fight in Europe. And so they arrived in England middle of January 1944 and began training in earnest for the Normandy operation. He jumped into France on about 1:30 in the morning on 6 June 44 with about 13,000 other paratroopers. Like many of them, as many of you know, they were all misdropped. And him and his platoon sergeant were separated from the battalion, and it took them 3 days to kind of fight and find their way back. They were pretty lucky to make it back. They assembled outside of Verville, France, with F Company 501, which was the rally point for that company. He was killed in action 3 days later. Those of you familiar with the Band of Brothers miniseries, Episode 3, Carentan, that's the battle that my uncle lost his life in. He was the point man that day. They had taken Carentan on the 10th and 11th, and the commanders of the 101st, who knew the Germans quite well, the Germans were well known for very ferocious and frequent counterattacks. They wanted to keep the Germans out of Carentan, so they went outside of the town into a little hamlet called La Billenerie, very dense hedgerow country. And my uncle was the point man that morning when they marched out of Carentan. He wound up on the far left end of a hedgerow position. His captain deployed the company in a company line on a pretty dense hedgerow because they had some intelligence that the 17th SS were in that area, German troops. And the Germans didn't attack right away. What happened was they came marching in a company, several lines toward our company line with their hands in the air. They had their weapons slung, but they had flags and they had their hands in the air. And unfortunately, it was a ploy to get as close to our line as they possibly could. And unfortunately, my uncle on the far left end with the mortar squad, he thought it was a real surrender. So he stepped out and exposed himself, left his position thinking he was going to accept a formal surrender. And when he did that, the Germans in the front rank threw their weapons into firing position and just shot him dead right there. Pitched battle occurred, and several other members of my uncle's company were killed, wounded. We got forced back to the next hedgerow. And then later that afternoon, they retook that position when they were reinforced. So that's kind of the story of my uncle. He was brought home in June of 1948 when the French decided to move the military cemetery, which was at Saint-Mère-Église at that time. And they wanted to move it up north to the very famous cemetery that we all know today near Utah Beach. And so my granddad decided to bring him home. And so in June of 48, he was buried in North Wolcott Cemetery. And that's where he's at rest today.
Wow. What a detailed account there, Dennis. Thank you for sharing about that. I'm a military history student, especially of World War II, and I'm just so fascinated about that generation. Truly, I believe the greatest generation, as you hear. So, Dennis, thanks for sharing the story of your uncle.
Very well.
Hey, Ben, tell us about Sergeant Major Boyard.
Yes, I will. So Sergeant Major Timothy Boyard, he was not a sergeant major when I first met him. He was my first sergeant that I had when I got to Maria, Iraq, during the surge in Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2008. 11 months to the day of me graduating from undergrad, I was I was in the middle of Iraq, looking around, thinking, what am I getting myself into? And Tim showed up, picked me up, and said, "You're going to be fine. Let's go out to the bomb shelter." And immediately I was like, "What's going on there? What are you talking about?" And I come to find out that's where our troop, Comanche Troop 4th Squadron 10 Cavalry Regiment, was going to be staying for the next 12 months. I had joined a unit that had already been deployed 3 months and were on a 15-month rotation, as during the surge, many units were extended out even longer than the typical 12-month rotation. So when I met First Sergeant Bolliard at the time, he came to me and as I was an officer at the time, a second lieutenant, just joining the team, definitely the youngest, the greenest one to join, and he took me under his wing from the get-go. Not without some practical jokes here and there, but also making sure that when I was in front of soldiers, I was looking the right way and acting the right way. Tim and I became great friends. In fact, he actually was my first sergeant for the next deployment as well. As I moved up to the squadron staff, he moved from the Comanche Troop first sergeant position to headquarters, and actually filled in as the sergeant major for some time as we were missing one for a couple of months. And so I would call him First Sergeant Major at times as well, which he oftentimes would like, unless I called him that in front of the commander. Otherwise, he'd be okay with it. So First Sergeant Bolliard and I then deployed again to Iraq and spent the better part of 9 months preparing for Operation New Dawn, which was the drawdown of forces in Iraq and the beginning of kind of the stabilized environment we've had there since 2003. So given that time that we spent together, Tim taught me 3 main lessons that I think I carry with me still while, when I was in active duty for 12 years. And even now when I'm on the reserves, I'm stationed up at West Point as an Army major teaching the cadets at West Point every summer. I teach these same lessons to them as well. First, as a leader, we're accountable for everyone in the organization. So in the troop, Tim, when he was the first sergeant is responsible for everything that happens. And if there's something bad that happens, he's also, if a soldier does something the wrong way, and usually comes back to him. Within a week, we had 2 people have a negligent discharge in the clearing barrels coming off patrol. And the command sergeant major at the time came to him and said, "You will clear every single rifle for the next week, no matter when it's done." And normally this would only happen for patrols. However, we also had a guard shift that had to clear their weapons every 4 hours. Every 4 hours, he had to wake up, even if he was asleep, go out to the clearing barrels and clear his rifles. And I never heard him once complain, because he knew this was his responsibility. And I think as in services, at least in my organization now, we have a lot of younger, earlier in their career people that come in and are learning lessons. And some of us that are a little bit more senior, it's on us to be the ones to kind of help them understand, what they're doing and kind of make sure that they're shown the right way as well. And so Tim did that for me. The next is that, leaders eat last. It's also a popular Simon Sinek book that I would highly recommend. But, when you're leading your group, you want to make sure everybody else is ready to go and has all their food, and that's literally what it was. We spent Thanksgiving, Christmas, and the Super Bowl together. And so for Thanksgiving and Christmas, they sent out a lot of rations for us to serve up. But we sat there, and some of my favorite pictures of us together is us on the chow line together, serving all the other soldiers first, finding out there's going to be no extra macaroni and cheese because that's what soldiers loved at the time. And so, I learned from him just watching him, making sure then also that the people that were on shift at the time also got their meals before we ate as well. Same thing at Christmas, and we were lucky to have a bunch of extra, pies and stuff that he participated in to do a pie eating contest with us. It was great. But then we got to the Super Bowl, we were allowed 2 beers that year. It was Pittsburgh versus somebody else, and Pittsburgh won. And he made sure everyone got their beers if they wanted them. And when they ran out, it was the leaders that didn't have any beers, which was absolutely fine. But he led kind of that mission. And then finally, it's not enough to just model the right behaviors. It also means checking in on people personally as well. Oftentimes, off the top of his head, he knew the situations and the personal problems of the 110 troopers that fell under his purview. And so I respect him a lot, and it's gotten me to the point where I try to remember as many individual details as I can about individuals on my team, and then also my clients right now, to ensure that they feel like we know what's going on in their lives, not just about the business that we do with them. He really instilled those things for me over both deployments. And then after our second deployment together, he went on to become a command sergeant major and took over one of the first security force assistant brigades. And so many years later, on his 7th deployment to either Iraq or Afghanistan, he went to Ashura one morning on September 3rd, 2018. He walked into the meeting without a Kevlar vest on, because at the time we were showing the rest of the leaders in Afghanistan that they, were here to worry about, the national election, and we're here to focus on the topics at hand, and we're not worried because everyone here is on the same team. Walking into the Shura, there were no issues, and they were getting ready to have a meal after the meeting was over. A meeting is a Shura, excuse me. And so they got together, they had their conversation. At the end of the meeting, they were about to go have a meal. And so in between going from the meeting to the meal, he went and used a latrine right outside the office and washed his hands, and then was getting ready to go to the meal when fire opened up inside the wire. A person that was dressed up as a Afghan National Police opened fire on their delegation, and Tim took a knee, drew his pistol, fired back, and then when going to cover, was shot in the back. An hour later, he was dead. And I found out later that year, or not later that year, later that day, in the U.S. that he had been shot. He had one son, Preston, and then had his whole unit behind him as well. So I think for Tim, it was important to see that at that time he was doing all the right things, modeling the right behaviors, doing the things that leaders do, and still there are bad people out there. So at the time there was an investigation. It was deemed that it wasn't somebody that was actually part of the police, and in the future, they made changes to ensure that going forward, those same things hopefully wouldn't happen again. And it has happened, there's not enough you can do to kind of solve for everything. So to this day, Tim's tombstone is in West Virginia, to the National Veterans Memorial Site there. And then I know they do a commemoration for him for the Security Forces Assistance Brigade down at Fort Benning, where they're located now. So, and I remember him every day. I wear one of the remembrance bracelets for him, and just couldn't be a better leader that I had during my first days deployed.
Just an incredible story. One of many, many, many like that, but that doesn't make it any easier. And we can tell, Ben, and when you tell that story, it's difficult, I'm sure, to tell. But boy, all the positive that you're able to pull out of his life is just amazing to me. And the way that you take those lessons learned and apply them today. Wow. Thanks, Ben.
No problem.
Kelly, tell us about your son, Corey.
Corey was one of those children that knew from a very early age he wanted to serve his country. Not only serve his country, but he wanted to be Army Airborne. He used to practice jumping out of trees so he would know how to fall. And one day he didn't jump out correctly and really injured himself quite bad and had to be taken to the hospital, broke his collarbone, thought he was going to lose his spleen. So we kept telling him, you're going to end your career before you even get it started if you keep this up. It at least did curtail him from jumping out of trees. But Corey wanted to serve so bad that he went to summer school so he could actually graduate a year early. And so he was only 17 when he went in. We had to sign the enlistment papers for him. And he went to Benning for basic and then straight into airborne school. And absolutely loved it, planned on making it a career, and used to collect Vietnam and World War II memorabilia. We always joked about one day we would find a tank in our front yard because he was bringing home some pretty big pieces, including a helicopter door one time. His pat answer for when we'd ask him, where'd you get this, was always, oh, I just found it. So it was always interesting. We never knew what he was going to bring home. but he loved serving in the military. And his first deployment was to Afghanistan, and he was only over there about 5 weeks. And on my birthday, which was September 17th, he was able to actually call me from there, from the FOB that he was at, Forward Operating Base. And I asked him, I said, is it scary over there? And he goes, Mom, I'm not going to lie to you. It's a little dicey. We're shot at every time we go out, and, it's always something going on. But, if it's my time to go, I can only hope that it's helping to save some of my brothers in arms and fighting for my country. He was called out 3 days later on a combat mission, and he was in a Humvee, and they had come under fire, and the driver swerved what he thought was a IED in the road, lost control of the Humvee, and it flipped. He was up in the torrent. It killed him almost instantly. The medic was also killed, and the rest were thrown out and ended up having to be medically discharged due to their injuries. But even though he lost his life, they found out later that just 500 feet in front of the first vehicle were some very big IEDs that had been planted that they didn't even know about. And so they said that there would have been a lot more lives lost had his vehicle not flipped, which then cost them to all the 3 in front to turn around and come back. So, of course, I'm at Fort Bragg honoring him and his service. And I hope that everyone this Memorial Day will take a moment of silence just to remember those that gave the ultimate price.
Thank you, Kelly. This is not the first time I've asked Kelly to be a guest of mine. I have a live stream that Kelly has been a guest on a couple of times, and I know her story very well. You can read the story of Corey Kowal. Kelly wrote a book that's fascinating. In fact, I read the book about Corey before I ever met Kelly, and it accelerated my desire to meet her. And I did do that down in Ruskin, Florida, some number of years ago. And we have become good friends, and she and my wife are good friends, and we enjoy spending time at my workplace, which I'm going to ask her to tell us a little bit more about later. So Kelly, thank you so much for being here and sharing Corey's story.
You're welcome.
Okay, Greg Page in Omaha. We have 2 Omahans here today. Coincidental, by the way. But Greg, tell us about Dagan.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to tell a little bit about Dagan kind of before his service and him growing up. But Dagan, or Day as we called him, he was always an adventure seeker. Even as a toddler, he loved adrenaline, not just your normal excitement from going up and down a slide or getting swung around. I mean, he always took it a little further than that. He was always going full speed. It caused a lot of laughter in him and a lot of panic in us. When Dagan was little, if he got hurt, it would make him laugh, where most people would cry. But if he got really hurt, he would hold his breath until he passed out, and he wouldn't start breathing again on his own. So as a kid, we had many trips to the hospital over the years, and he had a collection of stuffed animals that he had collected from his ambulance rides to the hospital through that. And thank goodness he outgrew that, but he never outgrew his love for adrenaline or adventure. He began playing hockey and skateboarding when he was really young. And he dressed the part, long hair, skater clothes, always going 100 miles an hour. One of my favorite pictures of him was the first time that I'd taken him to a skate park, and we're walking in from the parking lot, and he has one of my old skateboards under his arm, his Fisher-Price helmet, and his pads on, and more confidence than he could carry. And I've told this story a lot, and I think it really describes Dagan, that when we get to the skate park, he proceeds to go right into one of the bowls to drop in. He had watched skateboarding on TV, and he sets a skateboard up just like he'd seen it. He drops in, falls right on his face. And as I mentioned before, he would laugh when these kind of things happen, but he got right back up and tried again. And it didn't take him very many tries, and he was able to drop in, stay up, ride the bowl. He was excited. But when he came back up, he immediately goes to the next highest spot in the skate park. And I think that kind of tells you a lot about Dagan. He didn't quit. He had no fear. He was all about the experience, the adventure, and pushing himself. And we now have a term for this, the family and the foundation. It's called living the day way. Just kind of pushing yourself to your limits, getting uncomfortable, doing things that you maybe you're a little bit scared of. But he proceeded to carry that attitude the rest of his life. He lived without fear. He didn't worry what people thought of him. He was true to himself. In high school, he played defense for the West Side hockey team. And then he played hockey again since he was very little. They ended up winning the state championship his senior year. And his teammates have always described him as a team player who kind of pushed everybody, pushed them to get better. But the thing that they always commented on was he would push even harder when they were down. He was the one that was trying to get people to go through and push. And we heard the same thing many times through his life and through his military career, between his boot camp instructors, his seniors in the battalion. And it just kind of was a defining trait of Dagan's. As we've realized now, Dagan has always found adventure that included the brotherhood. And that was something I didn't realize until after everything had happened. But he was always involved in something that was bigger than himself, whether it was the Marines, hockey, Boy Scouts, his circle of friends, but it was always about the brotherhood to him. And again, not something I realized until, after everything happened, but really kind of, again, something that I thought really kind of defined Dagan and where he was. And the reason I bring all this up is one of the things that, I personally still struggle with is he was involved in a fairly large news story or a nationwide story. And I want people to understand that he wasn't just the Marine that was on the news. He was my son. He ate turkey with us at Thanksgiving and watched football. We'd go out to dinner and go bowling. He liked to put ranch on everything he had. He loved to go hunting or wakeboarding and hang out with his friends. He liked to golf. We had a speed radar in our neighborhood. He used to keep track of his speed on his skateboard on the radar by the house. And we'd watch him play hockey and do things that most kids do as they grow up. He was our son, not just the Marine that was on the news. It was shortly after he had graduated. I was traveling for work, and he'd send me a text message asking if we could talk when he get back. And he said he wanted to join the Marines. And I kind of asked the normal parent questions of, do you have friends that are going in? And he answered, no, it's just me. Why the military? I want to do better for myself. College is not for me. Which we knew. He struggled through school. That wasn't his strong point. So he had kind of decided he wanted to better himself, and he saw that as the path. And I asked him why the Marines, and he said he wanted to push himself and he wanted to be a badass. And that he was. It was a new adventure for all of us. We learned a lot as Dagan went through boot camp and went through the Crucible and went on to infantry training and deployments and, meeting all of his battalion friends. Every time we would come to town, we were taking, I think we took all of them out to dinner most of the time as they just showed up. But it was, Dagan had found his place. He'd found a place with the brotherhood, the excitement, a purpose bigger than him. It was exciting for all of us. Dagan had several deployments. He went to Korea, Japan, Australia, Jordan, and Afghanistan. And he liked it. He liked getting to see the world. He liked the going in the aircraft carrier. He liked seeing the other places and experiencing those things. And it was a lot of firsts for us as well. Him not being home for the holidays, not being able to talk with him for weeks on end, wondering what was going to come next. Dagan was on a deployment in Jordan in 2021. And this was when the Taliban was starting to advance and take over Afghanistan. And in early August, he was deployed to Kabul, to the airport, to help get American citizens and Afghan refugees out of Kabul as the Taliban had started to take over the city. This was kind of the final collapse. And they worked in hellish conditions night and day, trying to get as many people as they could to safety. And it's truly unbelievable, the determination that these service members all had. Their goal of getting as many people as they could out. Platoons deciding to work shifts longer than asked, going out into the crowds to find people that, had the needed paperwork. On August 26th, Dagan was leading his team in protecting Abbey Gate at the Kabul airport. And again, an impossible task considering the conditions, thousands of people trying to get through the anxious crowds, the Taliban checkpoints, our American service members trying to keep things secure. And then from a tactical perspective, they were in a horrible spot. There was a canal that ran the entire length of the airport that was about 10 to 15 feet across. There were thousands of Afghan citizens standing in wastewater trying to get through and get a flight out. This wasn't the military base. This was the airport. So it wasn't set up for, anything really that they were trying to do there or that they were trying to control. So they were doing the best they could and kind of set up as well as they could, but had lots of openings there. And it was bad. People were throwing, small children over the fence in hopes that at least their children would make it to safety. There was a Taliban checkpoint before you got to the airport, and people were doing whatever they could to avoid that. So they were coming in all directions where they could sneak through and try to get to the airport. So that day of the 26th, an ISIS-K suicide bomber was able to sneak through into crowds, and he took an unsecured back route, and he was able to get to a canal outside the airport at the Abbey Gate, about 15 feet from where Dagan and the other service members were working. And he detonated an explosive vest filled with explosives and ball bearings, killing Dagan, 12 other service members, hundreds of Afghan citizens, and many, many more were wounded. So needless to say, that knock on the door that night turned our world upside down. We were thrown into a world we never imagined, and I can't begin to explain. What I can tell you is that our friends and community surrounded us and held us up. And we found that we had friends that had been placed in our lives for that very purpose, whether it was people that could help us with the press or help us navigate some of the things that were happening. And our community just kept us moving forward and still does to this day. And that's when we decided this is only a tragedy if we let it be. So we now spend our days with the foundation that we started in his name to help support veterans and their loved ones, as well as pushing people to get out of their comfort zone and live the day way, as we say. So hopefully this gives you a little insight into Dagan and our lives as Gold Star parents, and maybe just a little extra to think about this Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you, Greg. I mean, it's been a few years now, a couple of years anyway, and I can tell by your trembling voice, it's still a very difficult story to tell. But man, I'm so glad you stepped up, like Kelly, to tell the story, because people need to hear it. I've had the honor to visit Dagan's headstone there. And in fact, I took that photo right there on one of my visits to Omaha, and I have a number of my friends there that regularly visit Dagan, and others that we have in common that have passed that are buried at Omaha National. Thank you, Greg. Allie, we're a little bit ahead. Can you unhide the next slide of Zane, and I'll tell my story real quick. Many of you know my story. Allie's gonna unhide that. I was depending on the timing, I was just gonna roll right past that, but I figure we have a minute or so here before we do our next round of questions. Wait for Allie to unhide that. Sorry, Allie, I threw her a curveball there.
If everyone can just give me 1 second. Technicals, let me just unhide.
And as many of you know, I've lost a soldier's son. My son, Specialist Zane Colby McDonald, United States Army. Like Kelly's son, Corey, he couldn't wait to go and serve. I mean, he was 10 or 11 years old when 9/11 happened, and was really caught up in that. We had recruiters in our home at the age of 15, and when they found out he was only 15, they beat feet out of there. They're not supposed to do that. But 17 came around, we signed for him to enlist, and he knew that he wanted to be an infantry soldier. And so he also went to Fort Benning and did the 1-station unit training, and actually had orders to go to Korea initially, and said, no, I want to go to Iraq. And I said, well, you better tell somebody, Zane. And he did. And he wound up being assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, which is very close to where we were living at the time in Savannah. So we got to spend a good bit of time with him before he deployed in 2009, the end of 2009. And he did a year-long combat tour in Iraq. And, he's one of the too many that were not killed on the battlefield, but passed after returning from the battlefield. And I would say it's almost at an epidemic proportion, honestly. And I know that Kelly is well aware of that, and the organization she founded addresses that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But we saw Zane change when he came home for his mid-tour leave. He was a different person, dodging mortars and IEDs and snipers, and why are you surprised? That kind of thing will change you, right? And but when he returned from Iraq, married his middle school sweetheart, has two beautiful children that he left behind. But in January of 2016, after watching his life really spiral out of control with very little help, we found him one day, and it was the most gut-wrenching, experience you can imagine. And so anyway, thanks for letting me share that. He didn't die in combat, but we still consider him a casualty of war. And like Kelly and Greg, part of our mission in life, my wife Lori and I, is to remember his name and honor his legacy. Okay, Allie, next slide here as we come to the end. Just incredible stories of service and sacrifice that I hope sort of set this new vision for people of what Memorial Day is and why we observe it. Thank you to our panelists for sharing those stories. Real quick, one more time through the rotation, now that we've heard your stories, maybe very quickly, in light of the fact that you each have lost a loved one or comrade in service to the country, how has that shaped the way that you observe Memorial Day today? And then Kelly and Greg specifically, maybe share a little bit about the organizations that each of you have founded to honor your son. So Dennis, let's start with you. How has losing your uncle shaped the way you folks observe Memorial Day?
Yeah, thank you, guys. So when I first started researching my uncle, it was more of a historical and intellectual exercise, but it very rapidly became very emotional for me. And so now I took all the information I learned about my uncle and I created this huge tome. It has all of his letters, all of the information I found out by interviewing surviving veterans. So I joined the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment Association and contribute to that every year. Every Memorial Day, my family and I and the dog go out to the Omaha National Cemetery and pay our respects to now Dagan and Todd and many others that we know out there, say a prayer for them. But this document I just showed you is required reading for all of my boys. Both of my sons have read it and they go with us. And then finally, to memorialize Johnny, I kind of made the shadow box of the medals he earned had he survived the Normandy operation. And that hangs in my office very prominently. So I guess for me, I'm a veteran myself, as you know, Guy. I've always celebrated Memorial Day, but it's more poignant now since I found out my Uncle Johnny's story. And we do a lot of volunteer work at the American Legion on Monday, and it just get more involved. I feel, quite frankly, as an American citizen, it's one's duty to honor those veterans who gave all so that we may have what we have, right?
Wow. What a catalog of history you've compiled there, Dennis. I think your uncle would be proud of that, and good on you for sharing that with the next generation.
You bet.
Ben, I know you continue to serve our nation, and when we were in uniform, we did look at things a little differently. Now you just have 1 foot in the civilian sector, 1 foot in the military. You've experienced loss. How has that shaped the way you approach and observe Memorial Day?
Yeah, so I have 2 young kids, 7 and 4, and we take them because my wife is also a veteran. We take them to Jefferson Barracks here in St. Louis, but then also, if we're doing something like at Worldwide where we have the flags displayed right now outside of GHQ, I'm going to bring them up here on Saturday so they can see that and kind of explain to them what it means. Oftentimes a lot of veterans are asked, the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day and the Army birthday and those kinds of things. And so I never am put off by someone not understanding the difference. It's more of just giving the opportunity to educate others on really what it means, for a day like this. So I think that's what I've taken away from it, is more on, promoting and educating where possible. And hopefully that gets shared beyond that first person.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that, Ben. Kelly, tell us about how you look at Memorial Day these days, and maybe a little about My Warrior's Place.
Thank you. Um, once you lose a loved one, it does change your perspective on what Memorial Day is really all about. While I think any Gold Star family wants people to enjoy the day, enjoy your barbecues, enjoy going to places and friends' house and all that. Just remember to take a moment to think about those who gave the ultimate price so that they're able to go do those things. And so it definitely changed my life. I've started, as you said, a nonprofit called My Warrior's Place in honor of my son, but also in honor of all those that have served. We support veterans, military service members, law enforcement, and firefighters, as well as families of the fallen. And we have 4 amazing programs. Besides the retreat center that we provide, we have Everyday Heroes USA, which provides catastrophic relief. We don't give people money, but if they need like new tires or a battery for the car and can show hardship, we're happy to help them with that. We have Fave boating expeditions where we take them out either fishing or on pleasure cruises. It's always amazing to see how the water is just can be so healing for those and allow them to just kind of leave everything on shore while they're out on the water. And then we have Project Crigador, which we've renamed to Operation Solid 7. And it's to provide help for PTSD, anxiety, depression, hopefully to keep the suicide rate going down instead of up. And then our most recent program is My Service Dog's Place. A lot of people don't realize this, but if you have a service dog and you have a medical emergency and you have no one that can take care of your dog for you while you're in the hospital or the VA, or maybe you need to go in for a treatment program, maybe you have a drug or an alcohol addiction and you're willing to go get help, but you have no one to take care of your dog, or you need surgery and have no one to take care of your dog. A lot of them will call it off because they can't find somebody to take care of the dog, or if it's a medical emergency, they have no choice. And those dogs are being taken to the pound. And they usually only have 3, maybe 4 days to try to find somebody to get it out. Otherwise, they're going to be euthanized or adopted out. And we just don't feel that someone should have to choose between their health and well-being and their service dog. I think it kind of really hit home when we had a young veteran in his 30s that needed a heart valve transplant. And we told him, Chris, if you don't go get this heart valve transplant, you're going to die. And he goes, yeah, but if I get out of the hospital and I don't have my service dog, I'm going to die. So we now house those dogs for free. We are getting ready to move our facilities, though, from Ruskin down to Punta Gorda. And we will be expanding. We're actually going from 4.5 acres to 12.5 acres. And we're actually going to have a gun range on site. So we hope to take care of a lot more veterans and their families and first responders and their families, as well as families of the fallen.
That's awesome. We're going to put a link up to how folks can find you on the web here in a minute, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg, tell us about the Dagan Page Foundation.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned, we started a foundation in Dagan's name, and part of it is trying to continue to keep his name going, trying to do good with it. And our goal with the foundation is to support veterans and their loved ones. And we're very passionate about the loved ones part, and we specifically use that term because we want it to be more than just helping the families. Dagan had a girlfriend, Jessica, who had it not been for the family, she wouldn't have had any support through all of this. There's not the government doesn't provide for the girlfriend or someone's roommate or whatever that may be when these types of things happen. So we tried to kind of open up and fill maybe where there's a gap in some support. And so that had a big impact on us. And Jessica's on our board and is a very big part of our family. So, whether it's a girlfriend, a friend, a roommate, whoever's grieving or needs our support, we're willing to jump in, and we're trying to make things easier for people to step in. Whether that's covering mental health costs, that instead of having to go through, a bunch of different programs to try to get it done, or if they need help with rent or mortgage, or, things like getting people out to boot camp for graduation, where a lot of families can't afford to get out there. We're just trying to do those types of things that maybe aren't covered by other programs or other organizations, and any things that we can do to help make it easier for that brotherhood that I talked about, or those people that are having a difficult time. And that's really kind of our goal with it, is how do we start filling some of those gaps and take care of some of those folks out there. As for the Memorial Day, I'll be honest, this is going to be my second Memorial Day since everything has happened, and I'm still kind of finding my way. We've always been a patriotic family, and Memorial Day meant a lot to us. It obviously changed our perspective a little bit through all this, but Kelly, you said it incredible, right? We want people to celebrate. We want people to enjoy the weekend, but absolutely take that moment and remember. And heck, Dagan wants everybody to tip a beer just like he would have this weekend as well, and enjoy the day and have fun. So, I'll kind of leave it with that. I asked everybody to kind of find a new way to grow, make yourself a little uncomfortable, and live the Dagan way, especially over the Memorial Day weekend.
Wow, great advice, and great work that you and Kelly are doing. Thank you all for sharing these stories of service and sacrifice, and hopefully it puts everybody in the right frame of mind moving into Memorial Day weekend. Very humbling for sure. And Kelly and Greg, as a small way to say thank you both for joining us today, and to say thank you for the great work that your respective organizations are doing, I'm pleased to tell you that our WWT Veterans ERG is going to be donating $1,000 to each of your organizations so that you can continue to do the great work that you guys are doing. So thank you very much.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That is amazing. Thank you.
Got it. And folks, as we wrap it up today, I know we got about a minute or so. I just want to let you know real quick, if Allie will advance the slides, how you can get involved with us. So if you're a WWT veteran, you can self-identify on Vantage. Reach out to a steering committee member. Anybody on that committee will be happy to chat with you. Join our Vets ERG Microsoft Teams site. That's probably the #1 way we each collaborate. Stay tuned. Our United page is getting a refresh. We're adding a community page, maybe a periodic newsletter. Engage in local activities with fellow veterans in your geography, and let us know about those things. And then stay tuned for more information about the global vet participation. I had the opportunity to talk to Dave DeVries in the Netherlands yesterday, and he's agreed to lead our efforts for veterans in EMEA. So stay tuned for more about that. Now, call to action for those of you that are in the St. Louis area. Be sure to visit either the GHQ office or NAIC 1 and 2 to see the Memorial Day tribute that several of our local veterans put together yesterday. We've got several hundred flags, a battlefield cross, a missing man table in each location, and we put those in place to honor the fallen, and they're going to be there in place through next Tuesday. I want to thank Ben Dalton, Jacob McCann, Jose Salinas for leading the effort there. Justin Reese and our facilities team have been great partners with us. Couldn't have done it without them. And thanks again to Dennis, Ben, Kelly, Greg. You guys have been fantastic in sharing these stories. We thank everybody for attending. We hope that you have found this information today to be informative, enlightening, and like both Kelly and Greg said, we hope you have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend filled with festivities, but also remembrance. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys again soon.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Kelly, Greg, Dennis, Ben. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Have a happy Memorial Day.